From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. We start in Mexico, where the group of Central American migrants in Tijuana is growing in size. A reported 3,500 migrants are currently staying in the border city, with the latest group arriving from Mexicali. Authorities say their numbers are starting to take a toll on shelters, which are nearing their limit.
The shelter is already full. I'm not sure what those in charge will do. No one else reads in here to sleep, and I hope they have a plan B. And the food, it's very little for the amount of people who are coming. I'm not really sure what they're going to do.
Well, we are not really suffering that much. We are used to this kind of environment because we have been traveling from the south, sleeping on the streets and sleeping in fields. I feel fine being in the shelter. As long as I am in there, even on the grass, I'm fine. There are no problems.
But these migrants have started the next step on their journey. They are reportedly looking for work to make a living. Our correspondent in Tijuana, Pablo Perez, brings us more.
Migrants have started to fill out job applications. They're talking about their previous jobs and what they can do, as they face a long wait for their asylum requests in the US to be approved. They're trying to make the most out of a bad situation, so they are looking for work in the meantime.
I'd rather leave the shelter and find work. I have always worked. I am not a thief or anything like that.
In addition to earning an income and lifting their self-esteem, finding work allows migrants the opportunity to break stereotypes and prove to their host country that they are good, hard-working people.
We want to show everyone that we want to work, that we are good workers.
There are work opportunities for them in Tijuana, a city of nearly 3 million people.
This is a city of immigrants first of all. Our parents, our grandparents, everyone came here looking for a better life. We cannot close the door to anyone. Therefore, available jobs should be given equally to Mexicans and migrants.
Some of the nearly 3,000 migrants living in the shelter at the Benito Juarez Sports Complex have found a job. They're grateful for every day they get to return to their families.
It's such a relief to have work. I'm no longer hopeful somebody will give me food. I am earning my own food.
Tijuana is not only known for being a major border city, but also for the work opportunities that can be found here. In this multicultural city, migrants who are part of the caravan are slowly integrating into everyday life.
And Mexican police have continued their clampdown on members of the migrant caravan. 3 migrants were arrested by police in Tijuana for minor offenses on Tuesday night. According to reports, the migrants were allegedly disturbing order and smoking marijuana. Earlier this week, Tijuana authorities announced that they have arrested 34 members of the caravan for various misdemeanors. Moving on to Chile, the appointed governor of the Araucanía region, Luis Mayol, has resigned following the murder of Mapuche Camilo Cartillanca. Telesur's correspondent in the area has confirmed that the governor's resignation. Mayol has blamed the opposition for, quote, not supporting the change that we are accomplishing in the region. He says Cartillanca's case was a common criminal's death. And on top of the continued persecution of the Mapuche people, the government of Sebastián Piñera is also carrying out covert deportations of immigrants. Let's find out more in this report.
Families have been living on the street for over a week. Men, women, senior citizens, and even pregnant women, such as Marie, who is 7 months pregnant.
How long have you been sleeping here? How are you feeling? Have you gone to the hospital?
I have been here for over a week. It's very cold. We don't have a home or food. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go back home.
Marie is one of the 82 Haitian migrants that were left behind from a flight that was supposed to take them back home to Port-au-Prince. Now, people from Santa Cruz Parish are trying to find a way to help them.
This sort of treatment is reserved for black people. I know that sounds harsh, and people try to rationalize such acts with the most beautiful speeches. But it's nothing more than racism, discrimination, and being afraid of poor people.
According to official figures, between 2014 and 2017, the number of immigrants in Chile rose by 232%. That's more than 1 million people. President Sebastián Piñera promised to tackle the immigration issue with his clean house policy, aiming to regulate the flow of migrants.
This whole charade by the government is to persecute and promote hostility against certain foreigners. While some immigrants are desired, others are unwanted, with the latter being people from the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Colombia, Venezuela, and even people from Peru and Ecuador.
In a show of solidarity, migrants marched in honor of the young Mapuche Camilo Catrillanca, who was murdered by the state police. But they were met with tear gas, rubber bullets, water cannons, and even planes, all in the name of democracy.
We have witnessed these actions for years now. The last few governments have been very tough on the Mapuche. There is a lot of racism in trying to deny that these people have lived historically in these lands. Just like they are denied their rights, so too are the poor and the people of color.
Human rights are being denied to anyone that is unwanted.
The situation is critical. It's also shameful, in particular for the government for being so racist and xenophobic. The whole world needs to know what's happening here and help us find a solution. As I have said before, this return plan for migrants has been a complete failure.
With few resources, the rest of the migrants left stranded in Chile will have to rely on the goodwill of locals. They have been told another plane will take them home, but no one knows when. Until then, they'll continue to live in these substandard conditions.
Brazil's military police have invaded a landless workers' movement camp in the Chapada do Apori region this Tuesday. The movement has faced 4 eviction attempts this month alone. The community set up a barricade and is negotiating with the police to try to prevent the enforcement of the eviction order. Families brought out musical instruments to the barricade. Meanwhile, President-elect Jair Bolsonaro has labeled them as terrorists. The opposition leader of Brazil's lower house had this to say about the eviction attempt.
Right now, we are at the Workers' Party bench, sending our solidarity to the families at the José María Tome camp. For more than 4 years, 150 families have lived on this land, but before this, they had nowhere to live or to work. For this reason, they occupied the area that was totally unproductive land in order to make use of the lands to grow food. And after 4 years, with the violent wave that's going on throughout the country, they are criminalizing social movements, and this is making its way to Ceará, and specifically the landless workers movement. So there are 150 families who live in this camp, and they deserve our solidarity and support for their struggle.
The greatest dangers for Brazil's indigenous communities come from agribusiness, mining, and logging companies. On top of that, 90% of the doctors in their territories are set to return to Cuba following attacks by President-elect Jair Bolsonaro.
Continued attempts at appropriating indigenous land by foreign interests is the main reason for the increase in human rights violations against indigenous people in Brazil.
Ours is a continuous fight for Guarani lands. Women and children are dying. We need to respect our roots and find a way to stop such aggression.
The greatest dangers for indigenous communities come from agribusinesses, logging and mining companies. If President-elect Jair Bolsonaro keeps his campaign promises, indigenous land will see even greater reduction in size.
This incoming government threatens much more oppression for our people. They say they will take away our lands. This put us on high alert. We must protect our rights. We don't know what price we'll have to pay, but we are resisting.
Now, these communities face yet another problem. 90% of doctors who treated them are returning to Cuba after the president-elect made insulting comments about them.
Our people were suffering before the Cuban doctors arrived. After they came, everything improved. But now we are back to where we were. We need the help they provide. When they leave, who is going to help the Guarani people?
According to the latest census, almost 1 million people make up Brazil's many indigenous communities. In 2017, over 100 of them suffered violent deaths.
Uruguay's former president Julio Maria Sanguinetti believes that the asylum request of former Peruvian President Alan Garcia will have a negative impact on their relations with Peru. Sanguinetti says all the details of the request should be considered carefully before a final decision is made. He says this is necessary in order to maintain strong diplomatic ties. Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, brings us more about Garcia's asylum request.
It's been 5 days since former President Alan Garcia took up residence in the Uruguayan ambassador's home in Lima. Garcia is waiting for a response from the Uruguayan government about his asylum claim. He's trying to avoid serving jail time for the corruption charges in the Odebrecht scandal. He reportedly received bribes from the Brazilian company to secure the contract to build Lima's subway system. Protests have been going since these accusations were made public, and more are planned for Wednesday. Over 100 trade unions and social organizations plan to gather outside the Uruguayan ambassador's home to demand that Garcia's asylum be rejected. They also want to ask the former president to keep his promise of facing justice.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. The funeral of Venezuelan revolutionary leader Ali Rodriguez Araque was held in Caracas. The ceremony at Casa Amarilla, the headquarters of the foreign ministry, was attended by President Nicolás Maduro, the Cuban ambassador, among other diplomats and government officials. Ali Rodriguez Araque was a major figure in Venezuela's Bolivarian revolution and went on to serve on top government positions under late President Hugo Chavez. Bolivia's Central Workers' Federation has endorsed the candidacy of President Evo Morales. Morales thanked the union and the National Confederation of Professional Artists and Musicians of Bolivia for their support. He also said that with the help of anti-capitalist social movements, the movement for socialism can win the elections.
We've learned and understood that we are at the service of Bolivia. I thank your decision of supporting my candidacy in the next election. This will be an interesting campaign. We are an organized society against the empire. This campaign will feature the social movements against neoliberalism.
It has been 1 month since former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass started a hunger strike. Relatives of Glass are calling on national and international authorities to take action and review the former vice president's case. They say Glass' health is deteriorating and has worsened since returning to jail from a recent trip to the hospital. Supporters say that the current government is responsible for his health and say he is the victim of political persecution.
What they are looking for in Jorge Glass' case is not justice, and it is not the only case. We have been suffering persecution. Our political blog has been displaced. They haven't even allowed us to register the movement.
Students in Colombia continue to protest against the government of President Iván Duque, demanding more economic resources to improve the quality of their education. The budget for Colombia's public universities has been reduced by 50% when compared to the amount of money they received back in 1992. This has led to a budget strain on public institutions, with some universities on the brink of bankruptcy.
The students are in classrooms that are not suitable for classes. Apart from that, we are faced with a decreasing number of teachers and also a decrease in the quality of their teaching.
We have almost 3 times more students from all over the country in all universities. So clearly, that has an impact on the quality of education and on the difficulty of providing quality higher education in Colombia.
Brazilian trade unions will take to the streets on Thursday to protest against social security and pension reforms proposed by President-elect Jair Bolsonaro. Union leaders said Bolsonaro's proposals will lead millions of workers to misery. He said the reforms are worse than those of outgoing President Michel Temer, reforms Temer abandoned in 2017 after pressure from unions. And the outgoing Brazilian president has signed a free trade agreement with his Chilean counterpart. The agreement will, among other things, eliminate roaming between the two nations.
Se elimina el roaming.
It eliminates roaming, which will allow the 500,000 Brazilian tourists who visit Chile every year and the 300,000 Chilean tourists who go to Brazil every year to better communicate.
I also believe that this agreement is the fruit of a natural convergence between our two governments, and therefore between Brazil and Chile.
Wednesday was the third day of the Forum on Critical Thinking in Argentina. This event is taking place just under a week before the G20 meeting in that country. The theme of the event is fighting for equality, social justice, and democracy. During the four-day meeting, leaders are discussing social issues affecting the region. Among the many topics being discussed at the forum are the issues that indigenous communities face, the rise of neoliberalism, and its attempts to erasing the legacy of the left wing. Now let's take a look at what some today's speakers had to say.
Today, but especially in 2018, we continue to have very repressive state policies. They are racist towards our people. They stigmatize our struggles to recover our ancestral territories that were stolen away from us hundreds of years ago. They are still owned by the same people or by logging companies. Today, we are being invaded by multinational corporations, specifically by mining and hydroelectric companies.
We have been hearing a lot about the end of progressive movements in Latin America. And yes, many right-wing governments have taken power. Neoliberalism is strong at the moment, but there are also positive signals, such as López Obrador's victory in Mexico, which is a very progressive movement.
We cannot forget about our many victories during the first decade of this century. These newly empowered right-wing or sometimes far-right governments are trying to erase the memory of everything the left achieved and say that fruitful period was marred with corruption. Lula is corrupt, Cristina is corrupt, Correa is corrupt. There were no social policies. Everything was corruption. There were no scholarships, no health care, no right to education, nothing. This forum is so important because we need to remind people of the Latin American left wing's victories.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide. Deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur. An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight, moments of hope, moments that transcend, moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The joint opposition candidate in the Democratic Republic of Congo has launched his presidential campaign for the upcoming elections. After a 2-year delay, the country has started campaigning for the December polls. Martin Fayulu is among the forerunners to replace outgoing President Joseph Kabila. Around 40 million people are eligible to vote.
The message is that there is a common candidate, and you see all the groups that make up the opposition are there. The joint candidate is here. I am the common candidate. I represent these groups. I am a spokesperson, a standard bearer for credible, transparent, peaceful elections and for ensuring prosperity in Congo.
The United Nations envoy for Yemen has arrived in the Houthi-held capital of Sana'a in another attempt to reach a peace deal between Houthi forces and the Saudi-led coalition. On Tuesday, the Saudi-led coalition announced that it won't take part in any ceasefire negotiations with the Houthis. The Saudi-led bombardment on the port of Hudaida has led to a humanitarian crisis, putting millions of people at risk of famine. Palestinians have had their stores leveled to the grounds, losing their livelihoods. Here's more on that and other stories from around the world.
Israeli forces have demolished dozens of Palestinian-owned shops in a refugee camp east of Jerusalem. Business owners were given a 12-hour notice to leave. They were reportedly targeted for not having a hard-to-get Israeli permit. A portrait of a young Charles Dickens, the well-known writer behind Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol, has been found in South Africa, 150 years after it went missing. The miniature watercolor painting is valued at $280,000 and was painted in 1843 when Dickens was in his 30s. It was last on display at the Royal Academy of Arts in London in 1844, only to disappear afterwards. In 1886, it was reported as unaccounted for. How the portrait got to South Africa is unknown. It will be on display at the Philip Mould and Company Gallery until the end of January 2019.
This lost face of such an important man in our literary culture suddenly returning from the dust of Africa, from the heat and the dust. And the first thought that we had was, this must never escape again. This is such an important, emotive face at such a critical time in his career. So we're working now with the Dickens Museum, who we hope will be able to raise sufficient funds to be able to buy it and repatriate it and put it back in the house where he lived.
UAE and France have signed a cooperation agreement despite a lawsuit against Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. France's foreign minister met with the Crown Prince in Paris, who was on a 2-day visit to the country. The International Alliance for the Defence of Rights and Freedoms in France filed a lawsuit against the Crown Prince, who is also the Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. He is accused of war crimes in Yemen.
An exhibition celebrating Michael Jackson's music opens in Paris on Friday. The curator of the exhibition says the work on display aims to bring to light the singer's race and identity politics, which are considered to be taboo subjects in France.
And also what motivated me, and I lived for 7 years in London, so I'm very conscious of the difference on the subject of the social construction of race. In France it's almost taboo to talk about race. It's very different culture in that regard to the British culture or the American culture. So I saw this exhibition and how it revisits the complexity of identity politics in relation to Michael Jackson was spot on to maybe trigger new debates in French culture.
And we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.